Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal Public Affairs program. I'm Jerry Williams. Well, recently you might have heard my coverage of the Barnes Museum of Southington, the New Britain Industrial Museum in New Britain, the Vintage Radio Museum in Windsor. Well, today it's the New England Air Museum in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, where they are committed to presenting the story of aviation. And that's where I caught up with President and CEO Stephanie Abrams, who was very gracious with her time in sharing with me what the New England Air Museum is all about. But on today's segment, you're going to learn about Stephanie Abrams. Happening now on the WIHS Journal, it's News and Public Affairs. Good afternoon, Stephanie.
Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Thank you for taking time out to speak with me for the WIHS Journal. So just before we get into what the New England Air Museum is all about, I'd like our listening audience to get to know the person. You've done a lot of things prior to the New England Air Museum. Where are you from and what's your background?
How much time do you have?
I got time!
Okay, so I grew up in New York City. I grew up in the Bronx. Family of immigrants, grandparents from Greece, other side parents, grandparents from what is now actually Ukraine and from Austria. But anyway, so lots of languages in the house, and also growing up in New York City, lots of languages in the street. Kind of loved my upbringing. Then let's see, after that, after school, my first job was with ABC News in New York. I worked with the science editor, Jules Bergman. Now I'm going to give my age away. So we covered, it was the year before the first space shuttle. So we did advancers on how the astronauts were training. I got to fly the space shuttle simulator. It was terrifying landing. I landed, but I killed everyone. But anyway, we covered 3 Mile Island. We covered Skylab falling out of the sky. It was such an exciting time in science. And then I went to 2020, and that was when it was Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs. My first job out of school. So I started as a researcher, then as a production associate, then I was a senior production associate, then associate producer, went to 2020, and then ultimately became a producer. So these were longer stories, and that's where I really started to find my niche, because I love the story arc and telling a whole story. And I worked with some of the best journalists in the business. I worked with Barbara Walters. I worked with Sylvia Chase, who both passed away over the past couple of years, John Stossel, Bob Brown. It was incredible. And then from there, I moved to California and helped somebody build a production company in San Francisco. We did investigative reporting for local stations all over the country. And then I thought, you know what? I'm living in this beautiful city, and I'm never here. I knew the person at the dry cleaners. I knew the person at the supermarket. So I went to the NBC affiliate in San Francisco, and I was a reporter. Probably at the same time that you were living there. I don't know if I look familiar to you.
Yes.
But I was a reporter for the NBC station, and I was supposed to cover science. And at first I thought, how different can local news be than national news? And it's like, how deep is the ocean? I was supposed to do science reporting, but every day I got pulled off science, and I was covering fires and murders, and I kept getting, I covered the kidnapping of a child, which did not end well. And then I kept getting terrible things happening to children's stories, and I just thought, this is not for me. Oh. So I went to PBS. Again, how different could it be? How deep is the ocean? And I worked on a show that was very much like Nightline, 12 to 15-minute pieces to set up a significant issue, and then in the studio it was a conversation and discussion, and I loved it. And then I started doing documentaries, and during that time, the Bay Area had so many tech companies. I got contacted by a tech company saying, hey, we need a documentary on global warming and to show what we're doing about it. And that was right in my wheelhouse. Did that, it won awards. And then I started doing video to support marketing initiatives or to explain issues for a lot of companies. And again, with my science background, I was still doing television, but I wound up doing a lot of that. So my husband also worked in television. So we took turns with jobs. We didn't know what else to do. So first we moved to me because I got a fellowship at the University of Chicago. I'll never understand why I was chosen. There were 10 of us. There was someone from 60 Minutes. There was someone from Dateline. There was someone from Australian 60 Minutes. And there was me. But anyway, and then we moved to Minneapolis for his first assistant news director's job. Anyway, we moved a lot. But I wound up doing video for a lot of aerospace companies, because then we moved here. He was the news director for Fox 61. And one thing led to another. I wound up, at first I was freelancing, but then created a production company with a wonderful partner, Dennis Ducharme, who is just amazing. And we did video for Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky, also for GE. I was still doing television. I also was still doing diners, drive-ins, and dives because girls got to eat. But we did video to support marketing initiatives, employee engagement, training. There were times that I felt, after being on the shop floor for a week, that I could say to the tech, "Move over, I can run this machine." Yeah. Some years ago, one of my clients who works for Barnes Aerospace called and said, "Hey, I'm on the board of the New England Air Museum, and foot traffic is down. You're creative, Stephanie. What ideas do you have?" And I said, "Well, let me take a look." I took a look at the website, and I called him back, and I said, "You have a problem." And so I gave him a presentation to include, augmented reality and video, because, I love this museum. I always have. I've shot stories here, but you really have to love airplanes to just love that. You want the stories about the people who designed them and who tested them. The courage to strap yourself into some of these contraptions and fly them, and the people who fought in them to protect our freedom. So everything I gave him was bring this place alive with video and technology. So, you really have to be, my mother used to say, be careful what you ask for. I thought maybe I could just be a vendor and help him out. Well, years passed, my predecessor retired, and I thought, hey, here I am, let's do all of this stuff, and 3 interviews later, I'm president and CEO. So my path, my career has really been at the intersection of aerospace and aviation, which I have a very deep knowledge of after doing, I'd say, at least 3 decades of videos for aerospace, major aerospace, for engine makers, airframers, but plus I know how to tell a story, and that's what this is all about. It's all about stories, and I know how to bring an audience in. So that's my story.
And you're sticking to it.
And I'm sticking to it.
Very colorful story. Real quick, first of all, we're with Stephanie Abrams, President and CEO of the New England Air Museum. What were you like as a child? What were your hobbies? What inspired you to get into the things that you subsequently got into?
So it's really interesting. My father was a crew chief for B-29 when he was in the service, and he was also in Dayton when Chuck Yeager was there. So, and that was when his eyesight changed. So instead of being a pilot, he flew second seat, and he told me in all these experimental aircraft that were just crazy. My father, I think like most people who were in World War II, he would never talk about combat. He regaled me with stories about they ran out of beer, so he stole the fire truck to get into town and do that. My father loved science and aerospace, and that had a big impact on me. But one thing that drives me from my childhood, I was a very curious child. I was curious about everything, and I grew up watching, a father who could fix everything, and I grew up with all of these languages in the house where people didn't speak great English, but somehow we all understood each other. Communications was very important to me. But one thing that happened to me as a kid, which drives me still today, is, again, my parents both worked. We lived in a very blue-collar neighborhood. My grandparents, again, did not speak a lot of English. So I had all these after-school activities because they didn't know what else to do with me after school, and my brother was busy with his stuff. So I was in Girl Scouts. I did all these other things. But they also put me into ballet. I thought, like at 3 years old. So I did it, and I was really good at it, but I thought it was just another after-school activity. And Jerry, when I started working at ABC News, many years later, when I worked with Jules Bergman, our offices were right across from Lincoln Center. And for like $12, you could get standing room only tickets because I was making a lot of money when I started. So I went to see a professional ballet. I felt like someone kicked me in the stomach because I didn't know that could be a career.
Wow.
I wanted to be on that stage so badly. And I feel that's one thing that we do here at the museum is we show children, we show young people careers that they've never even dreamed were possible. You know, they can get out of the flight simulator, and when they calm down, they'll say to me, Ms. Abrams, how do you make it so real? Well, let's talk about coding. That's another idea, and that really drives me today, is to show kids what's possible and to catch them early on.
And you just heard my conversation with President and CEO of the New England Air Museum, Stephanie Abrams. Join me tomorrow at the same time for part 2. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, call WIHS 860-346-1049, 860-346-1049. The opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily of those of the staff or management of the station. I'm Jerry Williams for the WIHS Journal. It's news and public affairs.